Hello there, and welcome to Weird Music on the Glumberger channel. Strange music show, looking at all sorts of different albums and whatnot, right? So today we're plugging in the guitars and indulging in some rather doomy heavy experimental music today. So this is one of my favourite bands from Rocket Recordings, with this oddly enough being one of my favourite albums of theirs, despite not being one of the most representative of the kinds of things they do. In fairness to this band, it seems with each and every release they're always just sort of expanding their sound and their creativity in many different ways. But a lot of what was recorded on this debut release, the band kind of strayed away from in a lot of respects. But I seem to really appreciate this one, and I thought, might as well try to talk about it because I just think it's very neat. So let's crack on. Today I present Orphaned by the Ocean by Teeth of the Sea. So of course, who are Teeth of the Sea? Well, Teeth of the Sea are a British experimental psychedelic post-rock band, I guess, featuring Jimmy Martin, Mike Bourne and Sam Barton. And across their discography, Teeth of the Sea have created such a phenomenal cosmic wealth of instrumental music, straddling the line of post-rock into territories of electronica, dub, psychedelia, even ambient, I guess, as well, though just about anything the band wants to explore, frankly. Combining ambient soundscapes with these face-melting guitar solos and references to so much pop culture of, the 80s and 90s, I guess. You get these, just these wonderful sort of tracks, though, that is a little bit difficult to truly categorize, but that's something I really like about it. You never really know exactly what they're going to do. And so today's episode, we're of course looking at the band's debut release of Orphaned by the Ocean here, released in 2009 on Rocket Recordings as its 31st official release. And so, as mentioned, in some ways a bit of an unusual album in the band's repertoire, as it's in many worlds apart from the kind of things the band would get more known for. Like, this early prototype of the band featured some early members as well, who have since departed, allowing just the trio to just forge ahead in their discovery of their music. Here though, I think there's something quite fascinating at work here, with this being one of those albums that falls mostly towards the sea part of the album as opposed to the teeth, which is a terrible analogy. But what you've got though is a very strange instrumental journey into the very depths below, as shown on the album cover of a capsized sea tanker vehicle. Featuring a little bit of a bigger lineup, this era kind of led a bit more towards post-rock, but there's still a lot of heavy parts scattered throughout, as well as this very ominous musical dirge to psych rock doom aesthetic. For some reason, one of my favourite things from the band, so I figured let's just start here, so let's check this out. So opening up with Only Fools on Horse, you get a huge dense electronic drone, and you're kind of thrown into some levels of intense crushing heaviness as a falling descent of sliding guitar strings occupy the background, swelling more with the introduction of this slow bass that starts to push it all along. Fascinating opener, and it gives the bass room to really pull off this very doomy riff out of the drone, and you wonder where it's all going to start leading to when you get this trumpet that starts to just open the composition up entirely. It then becomes a very cool, dense, doomy track that fills up the headphones with these very dense electronic intensities, expanding that sonic palette with peculiar sound instances the more it all occurs. Like a gathering storm on the distant horizon almost, just this perfect establishment of atmosphere and character to open everything up. I feel like it's perhaps the brass that becomes one of the main focal points of this particular track, with the electric guitars providing a lot more of the supporting layers on this one, at least maybe in the first 2/3 of the track, maybe anyway. But it just results in this incredibly heavy, ominous, droning opener that feels rather disingenuous of the band's output as mentioned, But It's perhaps one of the many reasons why this particular album's a bit of an oddity in some respects, though. It's kind of a bit more experimental post-rock, a bit more doomy as well, as opposed to the later things. But I like it because it's just doing its own thing entirely. I think it's very cool, and I really appreciate how droney the whole thing is, as it just helps pave the way for what is actually a rather terrifying yet exciting album experience. So sliding in from the last song, we find ourselves at Latin Inches, and you get a change in that drone as the guitar pulls out this very faint little melody that's lost within the delay effects, before it falls into the foreground with this beautiful little riff. Classic Jimmy during those slow moments, I feel. But from there, it just paves the way for even more bass to fall on those final notes, echoing out with this peculiar resonance as even some drums start to occupy the scene, before trying to push it all along with this odd beat that feels a little bit strange in amongst the drone, I would say, but falls nicely in with that repeated motif of that little riff. To me, it kind of establishes the scene as we then get this vocal that rings out across the sea with this very odd quality, really adding to the atmosphere that the track is presenting. It's interesting because you don't normally get a lot of vocals on Teeth of the Sea tracks, but this sort of little, just a little backing vocal of sorts, kind of like a sailor standing aboard at the end of the ship, just calling out across the sea perhaps, just it resonating across the very waters. It's interesting. It reminds me a lot of how this album is so unlike what Teeth of the Sea do in their music. But it surprises me just how much I seem to enjoy it, though. I find myself just buying wonderfully into that aesthetic of being lost at sea that the album's expressing here, especially with that little vocal part. All through the performances of these unusual experimental post-rock tracks, though, of course, across the whole album. To be fair, though, there is a lot of elements we do, of course, see from the band, though, like Jimmy's customary noodling across the guitar, though, with such expert precision. But the whole sonic palette does feel a little bit different, perhaps likely due to the additional member who seemingly never made the cut after this one, right? But still, I don't know why, I just like what's going on here. For how different it is, I just find it particularly interesting and delightfully strange in a lot of respects, and something I just enjoy listening to within the entire discography of Teeth of the Sea. I'll say it here, it's not the best album, but it's one I like to hear. And it does some peculiar things that make it this very odd navigation of a story expressed through instrumental music. And I like it for that. I like it for what it is. Spacey and droney in a lot of respects. But then it does get heavy at times, in a bit that feels a bit sort of like the kind of things that Mogwai did in a lot of their earlier stuff. Especially towards the end of this one, actually, when the bass becomes this motoric dirge, that kind of krautrock style, before the guitar just goes mental, creating absolutely psychotic landscape in respect to what seems to emerge from the gathering fog. Very cool. A very interesting experience that we find ourselves following the album's opener, just this continuation of being lost at sea, it feels. We then get a brief interlude of sorts with a coronade, I'm not sure how it's said, sorry, I do apologise, a minute and a half experimental soundscape of very strange samples, droning bass instruments, and electronic elements as well, operating different parts of the channels. Very brief, as it kind of just drones away, rattling out in the distance as you get the brass just fades out for a brief period, before starting another swell in volume. Strange one that it very quickly just comes and goes, like a momentary flash of recollection that takes you out of reality as you cast your mind back far towards that memory, only for you to be brought right back to the reality of everything when you get right into the next track of Swear Blind the Alsatians Melting. So yeah, this is a particularly cool track off this album, I find. I genuinely find them all to be in their own respects, but this one, we get a very spacey post-rock track that just opens up with this wonderful guitar part before letting the trumpet come in so beautifully against this dark orange landscape. And it gets heavier and heavier as the distortion pedals just suddenly drop into this very cool part that opens up the whole thing. It really just sets the composition off in a fantastic way. Very cool performance that becomes this very interesting interplay between the two instruments. You've got the brass, you've got the guitars, both in a weird way kind of riffing away into the song. I find it to be one of the coolest things, especially when both Jimmy and Sam start looping their instruments, letting these really cool notes come into the song, pushing it further and further into this cataclysmic build-up of distortion and loops, only for the drums to start militantly pounding away, letting the song go into this galloping riff that changes up the whole vibe. It's fascinating, and it kind of reminds me of one of the main things I adore in the music of Teeth of the Sea, the wonderful guitar lines you get from Jimmy, but then also the wonderful trumpet parts you get from Sam, though, as well as playing these wonderful bass parts, the way he's able to loop trumpets, create these big swells of sound that add so much atmosphere to the music. It's something I truly adore about what they do. And here, I love their little interplay with each other, the way they just bounce off each other in this wonderful way, and it makes for something so amazing to listen to. It's a very satisfying track, just full of these wonderful distortion effects, which is kind of leans on that kind of heavier side that we were mentioning earlier. But it gets so delightfully doomy as well, and I think it's one of the best songs on this album, something that really stands out in so many respects. I think I would argue it's probably one of the best early songs from Teeth of the Sea. I still understand it's not the most representative of what they do as a band, because it feels like very much trying to find your feet of what you want to do, and then they just took that tenfold with the later stuff. But I like the genesis of it all here, the genesis of a lot of what they want to do as a band, and how it results in something that's so cool to listen to, so heavy with these riffs and distortion and just this very doom aesthetic. One of my favourite things, and one of my favourite tracks, of course. Let's just move on, though. We get the next track of Dreadnought. So, I feel like by the time we get to this point on the album, we've really been established this very strange environment the album has taken us to. This image of the carrier ship capsized at sea. So this one opens up with the trumpets again, playing this mournful melody that paves the way for some lovely drones to start out of which this gathering storm builds up of the guitar, A lovely soundscape. But with the guitar there, it feels like it's perhaps leading to something a little bit more apprehensive, especially with the way the notes kind of cautiously land in these peculiar places. It's kind of like a sense of tension hanging around the trumpet as the soundscape slowly swells up. And I think as well, it's a very beautiful moment on this album, something that seems to capture this emotion of concern as you gaze upon the sinking of this great big ship, the containers falling into the waters below. So, it's perhaps worth mentioning here, a tangent perhaps, it's perhaps the very image of the album's artwork that drew me into listening to this one. When first discovering Teeth of the Sea, it was when I first discovered Rocket Recordings after being introduced to them by the band Nod. There was a bunch of bands I checked out, and I thought, I'd heard of Teeth of the Sea and thought, well, let's check out them. And I decided to land on this one because I really liked the album's cover. I loved the dark atmosphere that it was presenting. What you have essentially is this, this colourful illustration depicting what I feel is just the loneliness of being lost at sea with no hope or safety. You don't know what you're going to do because the whole ship is capsizing. It's interesting though, the whole story that this album seems to be presenting through this instrumental music, is one I find very cool as well. This is sort of being lost at sea theme that I keep mentioning. But I feel like, as an album, it's still a bit varied in terms of the actual music as well. It does present that story, but the songs still feel a little bit varied whilst also being tied into each other. Because you get a lot more leaning into drone and post-rock than the successors, all of which incorporate a lot more new ideas as mentioned. But I think this one's very cool, as it acts like a first representation of the band's sound, like this early microcosm of it, coming across in a lot more of a strange post-rock way. It's perhaps why this track is so strange to me, this ever-growing drone that just seems to build into this rising storms that rains down all upon us. A gradual build from the light miasma that opened it all up to begin with into this cataclysmic terror. And before, especially towards the end, before you get actually these very faint levels of distortion in the background, though, right at the recesses of everything, that seem to just get lost beneath the very waves of it all, making this would make it very odd when you get these very incredibly strangled little faint vocals that seem to come out. It's very weird. It surprised me a lot when hearing it while writing down my thoughts on it, because I never noticed it until writing about it. But right towards the end, just this faint glimmer of a vocal saying something buried within the whole song, and it adds such a sense of tension and mystery that it just really excels the song in such a fascinating way. Very weird, but I think incredibly cool with what it does with drone and distortion, just building it all up to this very cool level and just still establishing and continuing that amazing atmosphere that the whole album occupies. So our penultimate track leads in straight from the last one, Knees Like Knives, opening with faint electric guitar caught in these decaying delay effects. And for me, with how that guitar sounds, it kind of sounds like the circling of seagulls in the clouds ahead, hovering above some faint place, maybe over the ship itself here. Like, an interesting soundscape. And it comes across to me as maybe a little bit moment of respite, or maybe even not respite actually, but just a final musical phrase that's there to sort of, establish the scene before we get to the ending, perhaps. Like, a precursor to what would be the end of this album. Almost like, this final establishing shot of everything that's occurred and taking in all those details. It's interesting because I just always envision the image of the album's cover once again. But I kind of feel like, that the narrative of our great ship becoming lost at sea is now led us to, just be swimming further and further out into the ocean, and this is us seeing it one final time before we start to succumb to the waves due to exhaustion. It's odd, but I just feel like that's where the story goes, but of course it is just interpolation of listening to instrumental music, of course, it's probably not, but I think it's very cool how it still acts as this kind of little precursor before you do get to the final album. The final track on the album, which is the closer of Sentimental Journey. And so this, I think, is one of my favourite songs of this whole album. Like, I don't know why, but when I first heard this, I was amazed by the whole thing, just enthralled by the entire experience of it. So emerging from that miasma of guitars from the previous track, you get very strange and faint drones and oddly reversed vocals saying God knows what, right? But eventually, from it all, you have a rising guitar part and a keyboard situated right in the back maybe, and just a gradual build-up of all these instrumental layers that seem to be pushed so sparsely by this drum pattern hidden away in amongst all of that murkiness. It is an incredibly slow builder, and it seems to pull away from the sluggish descent of the drone with these guitar parts that become a bit more prominent, before even the keyboards join in, creating this very little melody that feels so anxious and nervous. A very spooky vibe that's really pushed further by the trumpet when it comes into the mix. And it becomes very cool when the drum pattern comes in, because it starts to really take much more of a rigid shape, but it takes so long to establish everything because you're given such long instrumental passages of everything. And as it all occurs, it's almost like a battle between all of the instruments themselves as they present the final moments of this album, perhaps the slow building awareness of succumbing to the depths of the waves below, our journey as we start to sink down. And it gets very ominous, the more it all builds up, getting very spooky, landing on this very weird Mogwai-like bit towards the end when the bass just rushes forward with this sense of urgency, making it all sound so much heavier as it closes out. And it even lets the guitar go into this mad distortion as well, just this weirdly heavy experimental chaos of discordance and stuff. But it's so cool how it's all built up to this point across the entire album. Like, I don't know how much of it is intentional or just me rambling about fuck all, to be honest, but I just know that whatever's happening on this album, I really like what's going on. I like what they did with the performances on the album, making it one that's so interesting to listen to that tells this story of being lost at sea again. And a lot of the stuff is very cool, especially on the later albums, but I love listening to this one as a whole, if that makes sense, the whole album, because all of the songs just tie together into this whole cohesive experience. But to end as well on Sentimental Journey, just to have all those strange soundscapes, that nervous tension and that anxiety that rises up towards you, ending in this cataclysmic overload of just literally drowning beneath the waves, is something so amazing to experience, and I found myself stunned by the entire thing. But like, I think it's like, I don't really know what the answers are with this one, but I feel like that's the nature of any instrumental album, right? That there's probably no real concrete answers half the time. You kind of just have to go on what your experience and interpolation of what it is you're hearing is. And my experience of listening to it, is what I've explained across the whole video. Just this story of, the ship capsizing, falling out to sea and drowning beneath the waves. And it might be something that's different to everybody, though, if you kind of do let your mind wander when you hear it, though. But I just thought it was a cool thing, that I experienced when listening to the album to review it, and I thought it was just worth mentioning because it's something I've always felt whenever I hear this one. So, yeah, weird album, right? But like, generally a lot of stuff on Rocket Recordings generally is, but I think that this is a cool one that exists out there. Like, as mentioned, I've always appreciated this one, this rather disingenuous, doomy post-rock album from Teeth of the Sea that is the genesis of so much of the amazing things they would go on to do in their later works. But yeah, it's interesting because I've always wanted to review Teeth of the Sea on the channel for quite a while. Just an amazing band that make great music. But out of all the ones I wanted to that you could look at, I landed on my favourite for some reason. I landed on this one, which is so disingenuous of what they do, but it's one that I thought I'd have enough to talk about, to be fair. But I do think it's interesting because you still get some of the framework of what the band would develop in their later albums, though. Like this weird, because it kind of acts like this weird microcosm of the genesis of Teeth of the Sea. But still, regardless of it, I do appreciate it. From the weird post-rock aesthetics that gets super drony and heavy at times, it is just a great sonic experience of such a dark and foreboding journey. And it's a nice thing for them to express on the debut release, because I just think it's great. Something I've always liked about them, the way their music just expresses these stories and emotions so concisely in what it is you're hearing. And I like how it all sounds on this one, expressing this esoteric journey into the sea. Very good album in this place. One that for some reason I just think is incredibly cool, despite not being their best. But I think, what they usually, the stuff they do, there's evidence of it hidden away in the depths here. Buried, sunk below the capsized sea tanker. Very cool stuff. Very experimental as well with what it does with sounds, but I just love that ominous journey it creates. Amazing stuff. And so I think with that, we will probably be coming to the end of our episode of Weird Music there on Teeth of the Sea. Like I said, interesting to have landed on Orphaned by the Ocean, but I just feel like this was one that I wanted to talk about. So a nice opportunity to talk about their music, right? Even though perhaps a bit of an odyssey as well. But it's the very thing with their music, though. With them always trying new things in their albums, I don't know where the best place to start is going to be anyway. But that's something I like about what they do. You just never know what you're going to get. But I think this is definitely, as mentioned, definitely one of my favourites, at least as a whole album concept as well, because you just get perfect levels of drone, doom and metal in that post-rock context. So, although not the most representative of what they do as a whole, I thought it'd be an interesting place to start with them. Don't know why we liked it. It's always just, following the mood that music really takes me in. So yeah, it might be worth trying to talk about a different Teeth of the Sea album at some point, maybe even something like Master perhaps, which has some of their most well-known songs. It'd be very interesting to, see how that would end up going, but we'll have to see. Regardless, cool album and a cool band here. So yeah, with that, I would like to thank you for watching today's episode of Weird Music. If you have any favourite songs by Teeth of the Sea, let us know in the comments, get some discussions going about the other amazing stuff they do. For now, I wish you all the best, take care, and bye-bye for now. Bye-bye.